Hello, and welcome back to the AIM virtual environment. Special greetings if you are attending an AIM event for the first time. We are delighted to have so many participants in this Path to CIO event ahead of a long weekend for everybody. I am Brenda Chia, the board co-chair of AIM and director at Paladin Capital Group. Paladin is a leading VC firm focused on investing in cyber technologies. This AIM session is going to be fun, high energy, and enlightening. How do I know that? It's because this event is being led by Susan So and Johnny Wu, two AIM board members with boundless energy and creativity. Let me tell you a little bit more about Susan and Johnny. Susan is a long-standing board member of AIM. She is a very successful fundraiser and IR professional and an equally accomplished baker. Susan, by the way, I don't know whether you know, I have a birthday coming up next month, okay? FYI. Johnny is the CEO of his own firm, Trustee Capital, after a significant career at Barclays and Bear Stearns. If you haven't met Susan and Johnny, I highly recommend that you do. We have a stellar lineup of speakers today. They are friends of AIM who have built meaningful careers in the investment industry. If I may provide a framework for discussion, it's about the evolution of your career. How do you take it from being a member on an investment team to the top job? What are the organizational skills, investment experience, personality traits, and political savviness that you need to develop? To provide the answers, we have 6 senior investment professionals. A very big thank you to Susan and Johnny and all our speakers and panelists for taking the time today. The opening discussion is with Alex Dornier, CIO of New York City's Bureau of Asset Management, also known as BAM. Alex is well known in the industry for supporting emerging managers. His career at BAM has been exceptional, rising from head of the Emerging Manager Program to CIO in 9.5 years, while straddling 2 different administrations. Alex, we're looking for answers on what it takes to be as successful as you have been. We are thrilled to have 5 panelists to engage in deeper conversation with you in the small breakouts. They are Ellen Hung, Deputy CIO of the State University's Retirement System, Mike Fang, Senior Portfolio Manager of the Maryland State Retirement and Pension System, Sophia Tsai, Managing Director of Trinity Church Wall Street, and Syed Haig, Director of Public Markets at the UPS Investment Group, and Wei Huang, former CIO of AAA and Senior Advisor to the Thomas Capital Group. Several of the speakers today will be announcing new positions after today, so it's an exciting time for them as well as AIM. Enjoy the session and please join AIM as a member if you haven't already done so. Finally, a big thank you to all our sponsors who make AIM possible. Over to you, Susan and Johnny.
Thank you so much, Brenda. We are so happy to be here with everyone and to see all these great faces. I think we are at 71 participants and counting. So we're going to jump right in. I know everyone is anxious to hear Alex speak, but maybe I'll turn it over to Johnny, who can ask the first question, because I know you've been keen to interview Alex for a long time now.
well, thank you, Susan. I'm just thrilled. You know, I joke when we were first thinking about this session, I was like, oh, let's get some CIOs on this session here, because I'm obsessed, right? Just like I wanted to be an NBA basketball player. I love to play basketball. I just don't have the chops and the skill set to do that, right? So I would love to be a CIO, but that's not my skill set. But we have 6 awesome panelists, 1 who is a CIO, and 5 that could be CIOs. In fact, as Brenda mentioned, 2 of them, front ran us and then became CIOs, which they'll announce in a bit here. But before we get there and talk to Alex, I'd love for each one of our panelists to take 30 seconds to a minute just to introduce themselves, and then we're going to focus on Alex for the next kind of 12 to 15 minutes there. So let's start with Sophia, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself here.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sophia Tsai with Trinity Church. Trinity Church was established in 1697, and the endowment originated from a large land grant back in 1705, from a large land grant by Queen of England. The endowment, although the endowment has such a long history, the investment team is actually pretty much like a startup. After a sale of real estate assets in 2015, the church has hired first CIO, Meredith Jenkins. I'm one of the 2 senior investment professionals reporting to her. We have a generalist approach, typical of endowment foundation. So I cover all asset classes, public and private, and do recommendations on asset allocation, portfolio construction, and manager selection.
Great, thank you. Can we ask you, Ellen, to go next?
Hi, I'm Ellen Hung. I'm the Deputy CIO for State University's retirement system. We are a $23 billion pension fund located in Champaign, Illinois. Our members are employees of the various public higher education institutions in Illinois. As a Deputy CIO, I get to work on all the various asset classes, as well as implementation of new strategies. We do have a diverse manager program, and every year we host a diverse manager week in August. I've been involved in investments in one form or another for the last 25 years. I love what I'm doing now. And would I consider a CIO role? I would consider it given the right environment.
Excellent.
Maybe.
Thank you. Mike, can you go next, please?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Mike Fan. I'm the Senior Portfolio Manager in Maryland State Pension. It's a $67 billion of a pension. I joined the pension fund in summer of 2019. That they want to create a hybrid investment model like a Canadian pension. So they bring me in along with another 2 person, and we started to build a lot of internal portfolio management in our team. So as of now, we have bring over $6 billion of assets to manage in-house and keep growing. The pension fund is very surprised to me, is in a very flat environment. The organization is very flat, so I'm able to be part of almost every decision making process. We help our CIO in asset allocation, macro, economy analysis, and then all different kind of trading upfront. So I really feel like the investment is the core of our organization. It's a very small organization. You feel like a startup environment. So I'm very happy with where I am. And if you ask me, do I want to be a CIO? You know, everyone wants to be a CIO if there's the right environment, right? If you have a right board member in there, right? Supporting environment, right culture in there. So I think it's if you have a right, factor all in there. Yep.
Great. Thank you. And then the 2 troublemakers on the panel here who took CIO jobs, now we can no longer take credit for them to get the CIO jobs. I'm kidding, of course. But Wei, who's actually starting his first days at his new role. Wei, can you introduce yourself? And I do appreciate, I know you're on the road as well, for you to jump in here.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. Thanks, everybody, Brenda, Susan, and really appreciate you guys inviting me. I grew up, born and raised in Shanghai, and have been in the States for the last 31 years. Started as an equity research analyst, and then after business school, focused mostly on the private side, and then served as CIO for the St. Paul Foundation, as well as AAA Michigan insurance company. And yesterday, I just started as a CIO for a single family office. And I apologize, I'm on my first trip in 15 months, and I'm on my way from Princeton to Newark Airport. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Syed, last but certainly not least.
Hey, Johnny, Susan, and Brenda, thanks for the invitation to be part of this panel. And I think big shout out to AIM to bring awareness about the Asian American in the investment management industry, because I think that's a pretty good job you guys are doing, and I'm glad that somebody's doing that. With that, with that said, this is, like I have worked in the investment management industry for over a decade, and this is my 3rd different place. The way I would characterize it, that First place I work at Emory Endowment. Then I worked at corporate pension. Now I'm working at a hospital fund, capital reserve fund. So it's going to be, all three are different and they all have different challenges. And I guess one thing I'm glad that I'm not going to be talking about LDI as much. that I'm looking forward to that part. But at the same time, I would say, like other panelists have said, what it takes to be, you got to be passionate about investment. You got, and then again, the most important part of this business is the people, because the investment management is not a widget business that you create more widgets. It's all about people, the relationship that you build and how you build that. And you nurture the talent in whom you work with. So I will leave it at that. And I guess I'm looking forward to hearing other panelists.
And just to clarify, your title now is Chief Investment Officer. You just started your job last week at Novant Health.
At Novant Health this Monday on 28th.
Based in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry.
Excellent. Congratulations there.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're going to turn it over to Alex here. Alex, start from the beginning. Talk a bit about your background, kind of growing up. We'd love to kind of hear you unpack your story on your path to becoming CIO today.
We're happy to do so. Well, first of all, I'd like to just say good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank you, Johnny, Susan, Brenda, for inviting me to speak to you and your members today. I'm actually very excited. I was reflecting this morning on the invitation and I was thinking, wow, they couldn't have thought of a better day, the day after my fiscal year ends, and quite the year it was. From the beginning, obviously 2020, with the pandemic, making our way through that, the personal challenges that many of us had to endure in our own families or in our colleagues in our workplaces, to then trying to manage through in the last 14 or 15 months to now beginning to get to the other side. It's been quite just an unprecedented and spectacular year. But at least from the business side of things, which is what I'll stick to, it's been an incredible run. It's been a year that I know many of us could not have imagined, if we were having this conversation in March or April of last year. So certainly grateful from that perspective to be able to deliver incredible strong returns to the beneficiaries of the city of New York. And as I walk through the background, Johnny, I'll kind of start a little bit on the description of where I am today. I work for the Office of the New York City Comptroller. It is led by an elected official, the Comptroller of the City of New York, Scott Stringer. We are the investment advisors to the New York City pension funds. Sometimes we, as shorthand, refer to the New York City pension funds as one pension fund. It's actually five. It's five individual pension funds that we advise collectively. And they are the teachers of the city of New York, the policemen of the city of New York, the firemen, the municipal employees of the city, and the employees of the Board of Education. And in aggregate, it's over 730,000 beneficiaries in the system, and the AUM is over $250 billion. So certainly a very big plan, a very large responsibility, which certainly keeps me up at night and I take very seriously. But I'll tell you, Johnny, if you go back to my beginnings, certainly had no idea that I would become CIO or planned, let alone, frankly, knew what a CIO was as I started my journey. To start at the very origin, as you have asked, I actually was born in Puerto Rico, so I am Puerto Rican by birth. My mother's Puerto Rican, and my dad is actually from the Dominican Republic. They moved to the States in the mid-'70s, and we settled in New Jersey, for those in the New York City area, Jersey City, New Jersey, to be exact. And grew up in a product of the public schools of New Jersey, and frankly, really grew up in a family, where we had very specific core values. And in addition to our own faith, we're a very tight-knit family. And my parents and my mother in particular, who really led the family, was really just focused on her children getting the education and the opportunities that she herself was not afforded and did not have. So I think that's a common theme that I think many of us share, some as immigrants, some of first generation, sons and daughters, where we come here to work hard, get an education, and certainly aspire to do better than our parents. It's certainly what our parents have for us. I think for me to move the story forward, I was lucky enough through some hard work, but I think always important, there are people that you meet along the way that impact your life in a way that you don't even appreciate at the time. I was able to move from the public schools of Jersey City, went to an all-male private high school. I'm also in Jersey City, a prep school, a leading high school in the state called St. Peter's Prep, which was really the beginning of kind of my foundation and my road, because it was quite a top-notch educational institution. And it's run by Jesuits. Those who know Jesuits are incredible educators, and it was a great foundation for me. Led me to Princeton, Johnny, and it's interesting. I began my college career, and at that point thinking about what I want to do with my life, and frankly, my choices certainly shaped by my parents. Was either you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Right.
It's pretty common. It's not unique in any way, shape, or form. That's what my parents understood. Those were worthy professions, and they were the aspirations that I certainly had. For me, it was more law. I've always been a strong writer and like to read. And engage in debate. So I thought I really worked to be a lawyer. And at Princeton, I chose to major in public policy. It's the Princeton School of Public Policy, at that time called the Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy. There's been a name change there in the last several years. But the goal was to attend law school. I think like many of us, I think on this call and this Zoom, I certainly was someone who heavily depended on financial aid to make it through Princeton. My parents certainly could not afford to send me there on their own dime. So I also wanted to potentially make some money for the first time and help defray some of those costs, not only for myself, but for my parents. I wanted to alleviate of some of the burdens that they took. So like many of the universities, and particularly the Ivies here in the Northeast, at that time, which just to date myself was the early 90s, I'm Princeton graduate of 93, but many of the investment banks and consulting firms, those were the hunting grounds for new junior staff and analysts.
Let me pause you there, because the immigrant story, the underdog story, the story, many members of AIM, we identify with you, Alex, right? And we'd love to see the success that you had today. Susan, in conversations that we've had, you joke about professions, right? Where, being a doctor or a lawyer, et cetera, right? Well, comment on that, because that resonated with you, I'm sure. Right?
No, absolutely. In fact, Alex, I'm born and raised in New Jersey, like you, very familiar with the schools that you went to, but it's interesting. We've had a couple podcasts recently with other folks, and all of us, it's the same thing. You can only go to, doctor, lawyer, or med school. Right. MBA business is absolutely not permitted. Right. And it's interesting because I just spoke with Seema Hingorani yesterday. She and our classmates from Yale, same thing. Her parents told her, you cannot do business. And she was going to be a corporate lawyer, which is what I ended up being. And, obviously didn't last very long. So it's really interesting though that those were also only your choices. And in fact, as you were talking, I was curious, like, so how did you get to business? Because
Exactly.
obviously I could see you, especially from Princeton, going on and becoming, a politician and doing policy, serving the greater good, which is what you are doing now today.
Absolutely, Susan. The way I see it, business came to me. It literally came to campus, and many of us will recall, at least for me, I'll speak with myself. The motivation, frankly, to attend, some of these recruiting sessions were the fact that if Susan, New Jersey, you may know Princeton very well. There's a great hotel there called the Nassau Inn. A historic hotel, and that's where they held these organizations held their recruiting sessions. And if you know anything about the Nassau Inn, it's expensive. So I certainly couldn't afford it. So it was honestly a free dinner, and a good dinner at that. And all you had to do was sit there for a couple of hours and listen to someone or a team of people make a presentation. And I thought that was a fair trade. And honestly, that's how it started. But quickly, like everything else, you listen and you learn something. And there was something about investment banking that just felt interesting. It's just something that I resonated with me as a junior in college, and I went to many more of these recruiting sessions, and ultimately I find myself applying for an analyst position at multiple banks on the street, and was lucky enough to get a couple of offers. I chose to go to Merrill Lynch. So I started my career at Merrill Lynch as an analyst, 2-year analyst program. And I think what I remember about that, and important for me as someone who came from a non-traditional background, who went to a non-traditional school, frankly, for investment banking. I mean, I was essentially a policy major, at a liberal arts college. My senior thesis was on juvenile detention. It was on the juvenile justice system. But I've always been strong at mathematics. So that was a good foundation for me. And everyone here will recall who was either an investment banker or knows about the training program of investment banks. It is among the best training grounds, I think, in the world. They hire the best professors, for the summer before you get seated in your group. And it's an intense course. Also fun. You get to meet colleagues from around the world, but you're also learning. And I took that obviously incredibly serious. I also remember, once I joined the group that I was assigned to, I was the kind of junior analyst that I was the one who was there at 2, 3 in the morning when I was done with whatever work I was assigned, reading, the corporate finance book, working on models, because I had not really worked on models before joining the firm and going through training, and teaching myself, how to balance models, which is, you can't balance a model, you're not going to make it as an investment banker. So it really was about putting my head down and doing the hard work. And frankly, about meeting the right people in the organization that can be helpful. Nothing I've ever done from day one, as I mentioned, even in getting through primary school to get to high school, was done on my own. I had a community, starting with my family, that was incredibly helpful to me, but there was always important people guiding me in the right direction. And I would say, for the audience in particular, that if those people don't come to you, you have to find them. You have to seek them out. Mentors are critical to everyone's career. And I always say, if they're not made available to you, if there isn't a mentor program where you're working, find someone, because I guarantee you that you will find people in your organization that are more than happy to serve as your mentor. And frankly, if the answer is that there isn't one, if there's no appetite to teach and mentor, you're probably not at the right place, just to be very direct with you. And you also have to remember that you are, the driver of your own life and your own career, and you have to take the reins and make those decisions.
Alex, how did you start? How did you move? Because you still had the love of law potentially, right? And now you were like an analyst working 100, 120-hour work weeks. I remember that time too. I was an associate. So But what made you ultimately say, this is the field I want to be? In fact, I want to move to investing, right?
Yeah.
And you've had such a successful career of that. But I'm curious for the audience, how did you ultimately think that's the way I want to do it? I don't want to do law at all.
Susan, it evolved over time. I will tell you, it was one of those things where you jump into it, you do the hard work, and then you start seeing results, right? And then you start being good at it, frankly. You start getting, some good feedback coming back to you, which feels really good. And you start enjoying your work. You start seeing that even if you're the most junior person on the team, and that sometimes means if you're even invited to the meeting, you're literally the person carrying the books. I mean, that was the job at one point. You carried the pitch books. Understanding what your contributions were, no matter how small, to the overall project and what the project was actually leading to, whether it was a strategic transaction, an M&A transaction, or an underwriting or financing, and what those dollars were being used for to fund growth, to grow an operation, to expand staff, I found incredibly rewarding. So I ended up liking it. And then I will say, and this is something that, again, I didn't think would come in handy. Frankly, I don't know why, but again, if you remember my background, Hispanic background, I have a language skill. After my second year, and I was then applying to business school because I liked what I was doing. And that's the trajectory that then I chose to kind of change my direction. Merrill Lynch, Susan, opened a Mexico City office. And there were two senior MDs who were going to open the office, and they needed a junior analyst to work with them. And I want to believe, and I still believe, that I was asked and invited to do so because I was a strong analyst and I was top of my class the first 2 years. But believe it or not, in 1995, I was the only Spanish-speaking junior analyst in all of Merrill Lynch in New York City, which, to think about that, blows my mind. Today, the only one. So I think I was valuable from that perspective. I had a language skill that they needed. So I was asked to serve as a third year as an analyst. Moved to Mexico City, spent a year there, traveled all of Latin America, as a young 20-something-year-old, just had a great time. As I'm finishing that job, and there, we had a quite successful first year, I was directly promoted to associate. So I never went to business school, and I had one stipulation. I would accept the job if I was able to move back to New York and work in their core, principal corporate finance team, because I didn't want to be in a satellite office as I was starting my associate career, and I really wanted to be back in New York and get that experience, because I thought that would be important and fundamental to my learnings. One interesting story that I'll mention is that, so I became an associate. And at that point, we were transitioning to sector teams and sector groups. So I have been part of the retail and industry teams. And we also spend, I would probably say, spent more than half of my time servicing financial sponsors, private equity firms, we call them today. So that's important too. So as I began my associate career, my post-MBA for most people's career, I was also focused as an advisor, as an investment banker on private equity firms. So my career has also been in different parts of the private equity industry, beginning as an advisor, as I just said, as an investment banker. One very interesting comment I just like to make, because life never ceases to amaze me. When I was a second or third year associate, we were working on a transaction. And it was a sell-side M&A mandate of a coat manufacturer, family business that had grown over multiple decades and a couple generations into a very large business. And what is very interesting about that transaction that I worked on is that my dad worked for that company for over 25 years in one of their factories in Jersey City. He was a factory worker for this company that eventually I worked on a team as an associate on the sell side.
You must have had great insight.
I tell you, and I remember having a conversation, you know, with the lead, the owner, you know, the elder statesman of the family, and telling him, you know, my dad worked for you, had just recently retired, I think at that time. That was a very full circle moment for me of life. And a very proud moment, frankly, for my family.
Alex, if I may, so I know you spent the better part of over a decade, 11 years, Merrill Lynch, and then some additional time with a spin out of KPMG.
Yes.
But you know, the story about joining the Obama administration, I would love for you to spend maybe a minute or so on that and making that transition.
And I think that's a good segue to one of the questions that also Susan had, is that, you know, after a decade at Merrill, you know, prior to Merrill, you know, merging into Bank of America, you know, I left Merrill Lynch. I worked, as you've mentioned, for a sell-side M&A shop for a little bit. I also, and importantly, before I get to the Obama administration, spent a couple of years working for a private equity firm on the principal investing side. So I mentioned that because now I've spent a decade, you know, working as an advisor to private equity firms, you know, and financial sponsors group. Now did principal investing for a while, and really just this unique opportunity came up in 2010, where a friend of mine, frankly, who ended up working on the Obama campaign, and after Obama was elected, was working to help source in OMB at the federal government political appointees. And he obviously, one of the things he did was call his friends to see, you know, who was interested potentially for competing for some of these positions. And Susan, that I found to me to be a unique opportunity to do something that I wanted to do from day one, which is public service. Because I thought my path to being a lawyer and being, you know, in the legal community was one that's going to be in the public sector, which is where I wanted to serve. And I found that I had a unique opportunity to go do that. And also, what was interesting for me is doing it at a more senior level. You know, I was able to leverage, you know, the skill set that I had built over the last 12, 14 years before that. And I ended up working at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Within the U.S. Department of Commerce is an agency called the Minority Business Development Agency. Actually started during the Nixon era. And that agency, actually their sole focus is to help small business run by women and diverse owners access public and private sector contracts and financings. You know, so I spent time literally just advising, you know, CEOs and CFOs on literally going to banks, you know, for trying to secure bank loans to grow their businesses, or how to manage and navigate the contracting system out of the federal government and private contracts. And that was, first of all, incredibly rewarding because I was able to use my skill set, but actually direct that to a community that had never served before. Because as a banker at Merrill Lynch, you know, we worked with larger companies, and frankly, very few, if any, of those companies were led by people of color, period. You know, so being able to do that for 20 months was incredibly rewarding for me. What's interesting about that job is that, and with every political appointment job, is that you have two jobs: the job of the agency that you're assigned to, and then serving out some of the special assignments and missions of the White House. And in one of those assignments that I was assigned to, and everything was about access to capital, because again, we're speaking about 2010 to 2012. I was on a project that led by not only Gary Locke, you know, who was actually my boss, you know, so he ran the Department of Commerce. We all know Gary Locke. And then also Tim Geithner, who was Secretary of the Treasury at the time, and Karen Mills, who ran the Small Business Administration, had a project for the White House and President Obama on access to capital. And it was about bringing together allocators of capital, particularly, you know, the leaders of large banks, CEOs of large banks, but also pension plans to help them either increase lending or investments in small communities and in local communities. That's how I got to know New York City, because I was put on the stream of literally calling CIOs around the country to join this effort. I got got to know the city of New York. I got to know the former 2 CIOs ago, Larry Schloss. And in those times of spending those 6 months together, he got to know me, my background and skill set. And he said, there's an opportunity open at the city of New York. I am looking to bring in-house our emerging manager program. At that point, it was fully outsourced to fund the funds, and he wanted to bring it in-house. And he said, looks like you have the right background. Would you like to interview for this position and compete for this position? Long story short, I did. I joined the city of New York in March of 2012, and I was running our emerging manager program in private equity. I helped design and then launch that program. And it was our first direct investment program for, again, small and diverse managers. And I really grew from there to the next position. It's interesting, to your point, Susan and Johnny, that was the Comptroller Liu administration. I joined in 2012. We had Scott Stringer became Comptroller in 2014. And an interesting point about that. So Comptroller Stringer joins in 2014. Our new CIO is named in July of that year. At that point, there was no head of PE because there was some turnover and some departures in the group. I was asked to meet with the new CIO. He had a whole day of meetings with only asset class heads and business group heads. And I was only added to that meeting roster because I ran the emerging manager program, which is very important to New York City. It's part of one of our core missions and core values. And our prior CIO was not familiar with emerging managers, the program, our initiatives, et cetera. So I was asked to get on his interview schedule. Never forget it, 2-hour meeting, hour and a half, him understanding what I do, the objectives, how do we go about, again, increasing and our utilization of diverse managers. I had a great conversation with what's going to be my future boss. And I did the following. In the last 30 minutes of that meeting, I turned the attention to the fact that there was not a head of PE, that I knew he would be looking to fill that role, and that I just wanted him to give me a shot. That's all I asked. I want a shot. And that was an important inflection point in my career. I had made the decision going into that I was going to ask for what I wanted.
Yeah. One common theme when Susan and I do podcasts and having these events is what I say is don't ask, don't get, right? And so the common trait among Asians is you're humble, you're quiet, you put your head down, you just work hard. People will notice your hard work. And I'm like, no. Like what I realized later in my career is you actually have to ask, because if you don't ask, you may not get. So that is something that I think is really important. So I guess to segue there, because I do want to bring the other panelists into this conversation here, is when you got the interim CIO role and then eventually the CIO role, was there a lot of asking in that process as well, too, Alex?
I think throughout, if there's one thing I'd like for the audience to take away from this is that, I said it before and I'll repeat it, you are the driver of your own life and career, and you have to be proactive. I think sometimes we learn, and I've learned this too, that Alex, as a young person, my mom would say this, work hard, put your head down, good things will happen. No, you have to make things happen. That's only a part of the equation. Only a part of the equation that you work hard and put your head down. That is important, but you also have to be proactive. Like I said, if a mentor doesn't come to you, go find it. If there's a job that you want, go do the things that are necessary to go get it. What I've always done from day one, every job I've had, is that I always work, and I first try to understand what is the responsibilities of the person more senior to me, the next layer. So honestly, when I was an analyst, I wanted to understand what associates did. And I wanted to take on that responsibility, because if I made my associate's life easier, he or she would also have more leverage to do more.
That's right. Yeah.
But it was also preparing me for the next job.
Right.
And I've always worked that way. So I was doing emerging managers, I wanted to be the head of PE. Once I got to be the head of PE, first of all, I wanted to focus, Johnny, on more strategic initiatives and helping my boss, be able to deliver. And in doing that, preparing myself in case there was an opportunity and an opening for the next job, but importantly, asking for it.
Okay. I do want to bring in our other panelists here. Wei, I don't know if you, okay, there you are there. So Wei, you were a CIO and then you left becoming a CIO and actually to do something more entrepreneurial to help in VC and helping to raise capital. But as we heard earlier, you just transitioned back to becoming a CIO for a single family office. Talk to us about your experience about being a CIO, because one mentor I had in my career, because I was always very ambitious, and I have to be honest, I did it because I wanted more money, right? And then my boss said to me, Johnny, that's fine, we'll give you more responsibility, but the more senior you get, you realize the more ass you have to wipe, right? And I did just say that, right? I just said that more for effect, because you have to just clean up a lot of stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, more than half of my job is all this non-fun stuff now, right? And so the story there is be careful what you ask for as well. But Wei, talk to us about kind of your experience, CIO, not CIO, and now you're going back to that role. How do you think about that, Wei?
Yeah, I think, great question, Johnny. And then, really appreciate Alex's insights, because that's how, I started a similar fashion. You always want to make your boss look good. In doing so, hopefully everything trickles down, same philosophy. But, for me, it's a little different in a sense that I think both Alan and Mike mentioned earlier, it has to be the right organization. I was like you, Johnny. It was, for me, I always feel like I can take on additional responsibility. I can change the culture of an organization, a team, so on and so forth. But to your point, sometimes more money, more responsibility does not mean that's the right job for you. And sometimes it might not be meaning that that's the right organization for you. So I, as much as I love to share some of the details, I'm just going to say, suffice to say, it's some organizations, because I was very fortunate early on in my career, followed good mentors, really look after teams, junior staff members, try to create a career path for them. And so when I became CIOs, I think not only for me, it's about the portfolio, turning around the investment results, but more importantly is continue that legacy and pay back to what people have done for me early in my career. And sometimes that runs against certain organizations' culture. And I always tell people, and recruiters always joke with me, what's the lesson learned this time? I always say, I can change the results of the investment portfolios, but I cannot change the culture single-handedly. So that's kind of my 2 cents, Johnny.
Now,
be careful what you wish for.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. Ellen, I know you've actually had some pretty good views on this too. Would love to get sort of your comments for folks here too. You've had some really interesting lessons learned.
I think my story is a little different. I think as an Asian female in the industry, we have fewer mentors that have come before us. I feel I don't feel like I had a lot of mentors. And I was never taught to ask for a lot of things, but I was lucky in that I had people ask me to step up and do things. And I think I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And every time I was asked to step up, I said yes, maybe not knowing and not bright enough to say no. And I just worked really hard. I think, as Alex had said earlier, we were raised to, keep our heads down and work really hard and things will work out. And I think that's how my life has taken its role. So I'm a little different from some of the stories I've heard earlier, but everything has worked out for me, luckily. And maybe it's just from being stubborn and being told that you have to do it. There's no excuse. You can't say, oh, I can't do that. You just have to do it.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. Sophia, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I guess I can provide a completely different path from Ellen and Wei. I remember one of a famous venture capitalist said that one of his career advice is do what you think is right instead of what people are expected of you. So looking back at my career, I've always tried to do things that are different from the mainstream. I've learned from great mentors and managers and investors that don't follow the herd. So like during the global financial crisis, you know, on behalf of GE Pension, we invested in a company out of a 363 bankruptcy process. During the energy financial crisis, energy crisis, I was asked to manage a separate portfolio to do distressed energy. But I told our CIO is that I think we need to wait. Private equity is not like you can market time that well. And it took me like a whole year later to find some really good distressed energy deals to invest in. And I guess another example at Trinity, I was among all my responsibilities, I was given the pleasure to build out a private equity book from scratch. And let's just take venture capital section as an example. I've never invested in venture in my entire career. When I first approached this asset class, when I think that valuation is already at all-time high, I was like, also Trinity and I don't have any legacy relationship with any brand names. So, and most people think that unless you are in the brand name venture capital funds, you shouldn't be in venture capital. Then I started to look carefully in the data. I find out that the return distribution curve in venture is very different from any other equity classes. It is not is not like a normal distribution. That concentration is going to be the best way to do it. In venture capital, 2.5% of the deals account for over 100% of the industry's profits. So with such a power law kind of distribution curve, and the fact that if you look at a lot of the data, more than half of the top performing venture managers every year come from the emerging managers. I've decided to go a very different route. I've decided to find the underdogs, because I myself is an underdog too, because I came from Hong Kong. I went to local schools and college there. I didn't graduate from an Ivy League. When I first came to the US mid-career, I don't know anybody in New York City. I started with a credit card of $500 of credit limit. And then I was very lucky to be able to work hard and get a lot of lessons learned and mentored by a lot of great managers and investors. I thought, you know, if I can do well, I also want to believe in and back other underdogs. So I ended up building my private equity portfolio, especially in the venture capital portfolio, with a lot of emerging managers. And naturally, you can find a lot of diverse managers in that space. So it is harder because and then also more career risk, because nobody is going to blame you if you try to spend all your time chasing the brand names. But I have been able to prove to them some of my investments, like just one single name that we have done co-investment with, we made 12 times return after the company went public this year. And that one single public company position pay off more than a full year of spending for Trinity Church. So I have been able to prove that there are so many ways of making money. And one of the ways can be just really backing the emerging managers and the underdogs. And I think there's a really strong interest alignment there. So do what you think is right, and it can be very different from the mainstream approach.
That's amazing, Sophia. If you want to sell equity in your own personal career for when you become CIO, I will buy some. Let me shift this over to Syed for a second here, because you spent the better part of the last decade at UPS. I know you've been sought after before. Why was now the right time for you to take a CIO spot, right? What were the kind of the circumstances around it for you? Because you loved what you did at UPS, right? But because part of it also is, obviously in public pensions and in corporate pensions, I hate to say this, frankly, you guys make less than, some of my MBA associates that I used to manage at Barclays 2 to 3 years out of school, right? And so, but you have to do it because of the love for the job, because it's so exciting. And you did some really innovative stuff at UPS side. But why was it for you so exciting for you to take this job now? And why was it the right time? Yeah.
I think I've been asked this question like many times, even in the interview process, why Novant? And again, and given, as you said, my job at UPS is one of the best jobs that I had. The culture over there is just amazing. And some of the people who work there is, again, I think it's very quantitative place. So unless you have a pretty hard quantitative skills, I think it's hard to survive there. So, but having said that, at the same time, you have to realize that UPS, we have become, when I joined 2010, it was around 15 to 18 billion range. Right now, it's over 52 billion. And what happens is that when you're becoming that big, the opportunity set also becomes limited in some sense. So I'll give you some ideas, like, swap spread. When the market went down in March 2020, there was a great trade and we added value. And, we made about $50 million in a market neutral fashion. It's great, but for us, it's 10 basis points. So that's one of the challenges when you become that big. And I always felt like 3 to 5 billion is the sweet spot where there are a lot of interesting ideas that can be done. And the scale becomes a hindrance. Though I do agree that having a UPS 52 billion, one phone call and I can talk to anyone in the world. That I don't deny that. That is an advantage, just that how you want to take that. So that was definitely one reason. The other reason I would say, I have two more reasons. The second one was as a pension, defined benefit, if you are 100% funded, great. If you are 105, 110% funded, even better, but doesn't make any difference to the bottom line of the company. And that was always the one thing that kind of, bugged me. Like, we had like really great years and it didn't go to the bottom line of the company. At Novant, one thing that really attracted me that, yes, they have operating income and then they have a non-operating income, but overall it's a combined income. And to me, that's another very attractive point. And I think the third, again, is more of a qualitative, but it's very important, the mission value statement of the Novant Health. Again, working as a pension itself is very satisfactory because I'll give you a story. I was traveling a few years back and I was in Houston and at the airport, a UPS driver met me and I said, we started talking. I said, I also work for UPS. He said, well, what do you do? I said, I'll make sure that when you retire, you get a pension. He said, that guy became so happy. He said, can I give you a hug? I said, absolutely. But again, working at a pension is very satisfactory. And I would say working at a Novant Health is even more satisfactory because, again, I have been only there for not even a week, but the amount of work they do in the community, the helping the community and all that, that is one of the, I think, big attractive point for me.
Okay. Mike, I'd love, you guys hear me? Sorry, it said my internet was unstable. Thank you, Syed. Mike, you've had a really interesting career, private sector. Now you work for Maryland, and I saw you shaking your head as Sophia was talking about going, the underdog way and, being more creative. And you're now in a position where you are also being, given this pretty broad mandate. Maybe talk about that as well as your insights.
Sure. Thank you so much for bringing such a interesting and diverse, like panel together. Like a lot of, I want to echo a lot of opinion people put in here. And I would never thought I would be joining public pension in my life, to be honest with you. But along my life, I always look for challenge. And what bring me into the Maryland State Pension, and I still thinking I make the right decision as of now, is that first, it feels like it's a startup environment. You always look for opportunity, and we are building a very, very strong program in-house right now. we are hire the right person to have a right culture. And I feel it's a lot, like to build a whole culture to help the public pension. I mean, John, you are right, I mean, I probably get paid more, probably 10 years ago, right, than now. But, like a lot of stuff we can do because like it's a long view that, pension is probably always a dumb money. I mean, and then, like people will just rely on the consultant, I mean, to do a lot of stuff here. But there's a lot of people who's all well qualified in a pension and depend on the structure of that. And, I want to credit to our CIO, he have a very supportive board and CEO and able to structure in the structure there. We can be very nimble and we can be very, very, have our own conviction and find the right person, like the person who really have a passion in investment. That's really, try to echo to everybody, right? I mean, like if you don't really like what you do, you probably cannot survive in the environment. Yeah. So that's why I wanted to bring it in there. And then I want to echo for Sophia's philosophy, that's exactly the same thing we try to build, in our portfolio as well. I'm sure there's a lot of good name manager, they are so big, they can perform very well, but they probably become so big, they probably can just collect a fee, right, without really outperform. And you can see a lot of emerging manager who's hungry, who has talent, and then when you kind of partnership with them, grow with them, that's really, you can get a lot of successful story out there, and we have enough power to make it, work. Yeah. And so
yeah, I think the partnership point is really, really important. I think one of the benefits of backing the underdog managers, those managers are more likely to back underdog companies and management teams. And there's like a really strong ripple effect from that perspective. One of our Korean venture managers, they were, I would say Korean founders were some of the most frugal founders in the whole world. Some of them, they don't even raise that much money and were able to become unicorns. And a lot of these founders, after their companies got sold or going public, first thing they did is that they share hundreds of millions or pledge to donate more than $1 billion of a majority of their wealth to charities, and some of the founders share hundreds of $millions with their employees. And so like some of these stories really reflect the strong partnership and shared values between the management team and also the investors. I think that really explains that strong linkage.
So in my older age, and I turned 50 this year, and it's funny because people ask me, "Oh, Johnny, you're doing this AIM thing," and they're like, "Oh, how do you?" I said, "Oh, I love it." I said, "I'm not making any money, right? But like, burning through savings. But like, I had an awesome career that I was probably way overpaid. But now, if I think about fulfillment in my career, right, just seeing, faces like yours and helping to amplify the message of the people here in the AIM organization, it makes me feel so good. So Alex, I'm going to turn this over to you, right? Because it's $250 billion. It's over 700,000 beneficiaries, right? Like, how big of a smile do you have every day going to work, right? Knowing that it's such an important job that you have, right? Safeguarding the pension assets, helping to grow it, helping people, with their benefits and their livelihoods there.
Oh, but before you answer that also, how much though are you now still investing? Because that's one of the things I was hearing a little bit as a CIO, you're not always investing and you got to love investing. So a little bit of that, if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Sure. So first of all, Johnny, I would say, it's a huge smile, and I agree with Syed that, it is part of the attraction of working at an organization, or a pension plan, a government pension plan, a city, pension plan, is the fact that you do see the results of your work. You are impacting the lives of many people and also their families and who they support. I mean, I think being able to say that you contributed, even in a small way, to the retirement security, you know, of hundreds of thousands of people, I tell you, it's a gratifying thing to be able to say that that's what I do for my work. It's also a burden because I also feel the weight of the responsibility. You know, I can't tell you or understate how concerned I was. 14, 15 months ago, because the markets were falling out of bed and there's nothing we can do about it. We are a traditionally, invested public pension plan with 50% exposure to, global equity markets. That's what can you do? So it's both, but ultimately, that is the main attraction of this role. I think also, and I think it was Syed again who said this, the other attractive thing for me personally, as well in terms of just professional development, as I thought about it, frankly, when I first took the job of just doing a very small part of what this organization does, is that to be part of a very large plan, also gives you access, and that's great for career development. That there isn't a GP, there isn't a manager, that doesn't want to, reach out to New York City, that doesn't want capital from New York City. And because we also have many resource constraints where, a resource constrained organization, there's a lot that you can get to do as a junior professional, in an organization like ours. So I think the learnings and the growth that you can achieve also with a mission that is just, just such a worthy mission, I think is what makes this job so attractive and worth it. Now, I will tell you that on the question on investments, that's an interesting one, because I think, first of all, to get here, I believe in the most successful CIOs, you obviously have to be an investor and a good investor. But it doesn't end, because I still say that even though I am not the one who is, rolling up his sleeves with every individual manager and doing each individual underwriting the way I did early in my career here, when I either ran the emerging manager program or ran the private equity team or oversaw the private markets portfolio, I still am chair of the investment committee. There is not an investment manager that doesn't begin the journey with New York City without having what we call a green light meeting, with our investment committee, which I chair with my partner, who's the deputy CIO, and then we rotate asset class heads into our committee. Also, the other very important, if not, I would say the most important part of what we do here, working together with our boards and our consultants, is setting asset allocation. That's the guide, that's the Bible, so to speak, of what we do. It is the fundamentals, and it is the guidelines as to how we invest in this very large portfolio. If you have to be an investor, to be able to contribute, to that conversation and help set the direction of the pension plan, because you are setting strategy. I think the difference fundamentally, Susan, is that, and this is with any job, frankly, the more senior you are, the more you are focused and have responsibility for setting tone, vision, and strategy. If you don't want to do that, then you don't want to lead necessarily an organization. And that's maybe a different conversation. And that's fine, because I think, it was Sophia who said this before, you kind of have to do what you are best at, and you have to follow your own course. You don't have to want to be a CIO. I certainly didn't know I would be a CIO. I didn't start off the course being a CIO, but I also knew that I did enjoy having increased responsibility. I did enjoy not only being the execution guy. If you remember, as I mentioned early in my career, I was the person who worked till 3 in the morning working on a model. I was the one who delivered pitch books, and carried books. But I also enjoyed, planning, what we were going to work on that year. What sectors that we were focused on were the ones that were trending that we needed to spend time on, and then how we were going to penetrate those clients. Contributing to those conversations, I found incredibly rewarding. Same thing with my current job. I think as I have grown in these 9.5 years, I have always found value and personal fulfillment in being able to set the tone and direction of whatever unit I was a part of, whether it was the emerging manager program, to running PE, to running privates, to contributing to overall strategy as a deputy CIO, and now being CIO as well.
And Alex, I'll allow the other, there's echoing here, panel members, if does anyone want to ask a question to Alex in the few minutes that we have before we go out to the 2 separate breakouts, just more from his experience being a CIO, or what doesn't he enjoy about his job? Mike, Ellen, Sophia, do you guys have a question for Alex at all? And if you don't, I have more.
I have one question. I think having been with GE Pension, which is a corporate pension, and now an ENF, and I think governance is really what really makes or breaks the portfolio. There are a lot of challenges. The board composition and who sits on the board and what they care for. So as a CIO, how do you think about how you can influence the board or selection of the board members or something that to prove to them, that how they should add value and not destroy value?
That's a fantastic question, because I think as I was thinking about, and I think it was phrased in some of our earlier sessions as pros and cons. Well, I don't see cons to the job, and I mean that sincerely, but there are challenges. And I think, one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I think it's magnified a bit at New York City, is governance. And you got that completely right, Sophia, because not only do I deal with one board, I have 5. Also, unlike some other peers that I have around the country, my boss, the comptroller of the city of New York, is not the sole decision maker. We don't have discretion. We are actually just investment advisors to the 5 New York City pension systems. So we have to recommend, and our boards decide, which means, Sophia, that we spend a lot of time working with our boards. We spent a lot of time, on the relationship side, helping them understand what our objectives are. And I think it begins, frankly, with the discussion that we have, and it takes us a while. We actually spend about a year on it, on setting strategic asset allocation. I think it's important for the boards to understand the decisions that they are making, in setting the direction of their portfolio, with the guidance of, me and my staff and their investment consultants. I think that's where it begins. It is about them getting buy-in to the recommendations that we are making, and that their advisors are making. And I think once you have that, that begins to put you on a path to then how you're going to execute, on that asset allocation. Because frankly, for a board member, at least in my opinion, I think manager selection, while important, is actually not the most important part of their job. That's what we're here for. That's
they love that part.
I know they do, Ellen. Trust me. I understand that. And
they shouldn't.
And you have to manage that. But I do think it begins with engagement, and I think it never ends, Sophia. It's one of those things that is constant. And when you have, a board composition that is, first of all, broad, diverse, coming from different perspectives. I have elected officials, I have union officials on my board. I have people that have certainly different goals with regards to their own beneficiaries. It does become an exercise in engagement. You have to be in this role, particularly in a public pension plan, but I would say any pension plan. Managing engagement of your trustees is critical. And you have to have that personality to be able, to have people buy into your proposals and have them buy into it as if it was their own idea, frankly. And I think that's part of the job, and it's something that's learned over time. It really is. I didn't know it day one, and honestly, I work at it every single day, because I think that is one of the bigger challenges, is just managing trustee relationships, and they are relationships, is how you have to think about it.
And it changes all the time because the board can change.
The board can change, Ellen, exactly. And then you start all over again.
Yep.
You know, to build credibility, because you have to build credibility, you have to build trust, right? And then those are just important elements to making this work.
Mike, you keep nodding your head.
Well, you know, like I cannot agree with Alex. I mean, I am not in his position, but along my career, that's what I see, you know, all different CIO. If they fail, it's because they did not manage the relationship, they cannot deliver a story, you know, that is really 100% agree. Yeah, right out in there. Yeah, that's why you are CIO here, Alex. Yeah.
That's great. And Ellen, you've been very vehemently in terms of wanting to get involved in the conversation. What are your observations and thoughts? You have a lot to share there, I see. Yeah.
Well, being the deputy CIO, I think I started out saying I love my job because I get to do everything Alex gets to do without being responsible for the board. So I'm responsible for staff, so the intellectual talent I get to work with, whereas I'm a little more buffeted from the board. I still work with them, but I'm not the one that they call in the middle of the night saying, what is going on? Or, you know, I saw this article and so. So I don't get that. I get the fun part right now, and I get to deal with the board as much as I need to and as much as I want. So right now it's really nice. I like being a deputy CIO because, you know, we're big enough.
I had the same view. When I was deputy CIO, I said, awesome. I get to lead the investment teams, which was my primary role. I ran, you know, was always overseeing privates. I get to contribute to strategy with the CIO and brainstorm about what we should do and how do we, you know, how do we set the course for the plan and execute. But it was his job, because it was a male, it was Scott Evans, who had to deal with the boards, you know, and had to manage those relationships. And I felt glad. What's interesting, I will tell you, I'll share with you, is that once I assumed the role, yes, it's been the biggest challenge and continues to be, but I found that I was able and am able every day to exercise a new muscle. And it's something that maybe I was a bit hesitant and wasn't sure if I'd be good at it, frankly, which is why I enjoyed the comfort of being deputy CIO. And I see that in retrospect, to be also honest and fair. But as I've been here in this seat for, you know, 3 years, I'm glad for it, because it's challenged me in ways that I wasn't expecting. And it's added to my overall, obviously, skill set. So it's one of those things that I didn't expect, that, not that I would enjoy it, because I think that would be quite the overstatement to say that I enjoy it, because it's difficult, but I think it's made me better.
I think it also depends on, being the deputy also depends on who you have as your CIO. You have to have a really good working relationship with your CIO, and you kind of have to, kind of think this, either be on the same platform or actually, I think, complement each other. And then it really works. And in our prep call, I had talked about where I would consider being a CIO if I wasn't comfortable with the CIO that would be in place if I was to remain deputy. So I think it's that whole interaction between the CIO and the deputy. It has to be a really good working team.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I certainly view it as a partnership. You know, the deputy CIO is my partner, and we are complementary. You know, it happens to, you know, that point actually is a real one for me. One of the things that I'll mention, particularly for the benefit of those that are listening, I don't claim to have a monopoly or to have knowledge of everything. I don't. If you remember, just in even me going through my background, I have spent 18 years prior to joining New York City on the private market side of things. I was never in the public markets, in tradable securities, and I get the questions, so how do you do it? And of course, it is about leaning in and working with, in partnering with your staff. Certainly you yourself have to develop a point of view. You have to educate yourself. There is a learning curve. There certainly was for me, because again, I didn't spend the last 20 years working in public markets, but you spend the time on it. But that being said, my deputy CIO is a market specialist. He's an economist to a certain extent. So to me, we have complementary skill sets. We work together, and also beyond the deputy CIO, I do lean on my team, and that's important. And that's the message I also want to leave Susan and Johnny for the group, is that as a CIO doesn't mean you know everything. It is absolutely not. Part of the job is also managing a team, and we are a team. That's really how it works.
Yeah, I think to chime in here, depending on which organization, the CIO role can be a mix of CIO, CEO, and COO, right? So I think it's really highly dependent on the organization. But like any other leadership role, I think the shared vision, shared values, how to go about executing it, and the culture, I think sometimes it's even more important than the responsibility you are taking on the role.
Why don't we close out with one last question and then go out into the two separate breakouts? Susan, I know you had one, right?
I did, although actually, in fact, it was great because Sophia sort of gave the segue to it. And we've been hearing a lot about how, particularly with Ellen, Alex, and Mike, you guys are at public plans. Sophia, you were at a corporate pension, now you're in an endowment foundation. Wei, you're with a family office. Syed, I guess it's a combination of everything. But the CIO role also depends on, as we've now heard, the board to the extent you have one. But is it different with an endowment foundation or a family office? And I might turn to Wei because you are now in this role. You've been quiet, and we'd love to hear your view, because I do think, and we hear, but maybe you can confirm for us, that is actually quite different and could just determine whether or not somebody wants to be a CIO. So Wei, with that.
Thanks, Susan. I'm in the airport launch. So yes, yeah, I agree. I think all of the above. I think it has to come down to not only the right organization and also the right team. And sometimes, you're just trying to have a culture to work together, and whoever is a better fit to be the CIO and whoever is, better for deputy. I think ultimately what I've learned is always trying to have the right kind of team mindset. But to your question, I do believe so far, it's still obviously 2 days honeymoon period. I do believe the family office gives me better focus, less politics, and a better transparency in terms of my reporting. Just a little bit easier to do my real job, which is investing, asset allocation, building the right team, having the right process, and staying patient, all of the above, which is truly what I was trained and brought up to be. And sometimes insurance companies really need our skill sets, but unfortunately, they are not built in terms of culture and right organization, talent retention, all of the above, to really build a sustainable investment team in culture. So that's the reason. I think every case, it's like people talk about, warn me about every family office is different. And you talk to every single family office, there's every different version of it. But I think you just have to, as an investor, you have to do your own due diligence. You have to do a lot of reference checks. And you also have to believe in your gut feeling when you meet with the principals to decide whether this is the right kind of a direction for you. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Thank you.
Right.
I just want to make this wrap up really quick. I think first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for being a part of this program. Johnny and Susan, I think you guys are in there somewhere. I can't see anyone. Thank you for organizing this group. Sophia, Alex, Ellen, Mike, Saeed, thank you for being a part of this program. I mean, it's really the generosity of all of you that has really made this program possible. We do kind of live with this perspective of kind of pay forward. And so I am grateful for all of your participation. As the CEO of this great organization, I'd be remiss if you all enjoyed the program. I would encourage all of you, hopefully, if you happen to be on the West Coast or flying to the West Coast, hopefully you can all join us for our national conference. It's September 15th and 16th. It will be 2 years since we've actually had a face-to-face event at the national level, and we're going to bring everyone back together. In fact, the theme of the event is AIM Together, also sort of in recognition of the solidarity that we feel for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, particularly related to the recent kind of increase in hate crime, but also it's just us coming together as a community, as people sort of dedicated to supporting each other. I hope all of you can join us for that, again, September 15, 16. If you go to aim.org, you can get all the information you need about registering for the conference. We have some of the top allocators in the country already committed to join us. In addition to some of these things that we do, which is, you know, these educational efforts, these Zoom-based virtual events that we've been doing over the last year, and now the face-to-face event, we are also focused on a lot of other things. Some of the discussions that you all have been talking about was around mentorship, creating a career path for all of you. One of the things that we launched recently was a cohort group in New York to support mentorship, executive coaching needs, and other professional growth training that we're supporting our members with. So keep an eye out for some of those things. We're also launching a lot of different chapters throughout the country. We have one in Boston. We're about to launch something in Southern California in about 2 weeks. We're working on New York. We'll be working on Chicago and other markets as well. And so I hope you can find different ways to engage with this organization, support our common cause of ensuring that Asian Americans and all people of all backgrounds have an opportunity for growth and opportunity in this industry. So with that, again, thank you for joining. Thank you to all the speakers once again. And Johnny and Susan, you guys always are a rock star. Thank you for making this happen. And the team that stands behind making this program work, thank you, all the folks behind the scenes as well. So again, appreciate everything. Enjoy the 4th weekend, and I hope to see as many of you as possible at our conference. Have a good one.